Danny, I'm sure you do, remember the 22-inning Expos Dodgers game, August 23rd, 1989, which was, at the time, maybe without precedent, scoreless until the 22nd inning.
It was unbelievable. I was there in the press box and sitting through. It started on the 23rd and ended on the 25th. So you can believe what, going more than 2 full games and nobody scored. And there was a lot of interesting things that went on. Larry Walker in right field made what you call a phantom catch of a ball that appeared to go into his glove, but he actually trapped it. But the umpires called it out. And Larry Walker was also nailed for leaving third base on a sacrifice fly by Mike Fitzgerald, and they called him out. But Walker said he didn't leave early. There was something going on between him and some of the umpires, but he'd only been in the major leagues for a few games. And all of a sudden, he was causing problems with the umpires. But, Dennis Martinez, the starting pitcher, came in to pitch the 22nd inning, and Rick Dempsey headed out, his former teammate in Baltimore. So very few relief performances ever by Dennis Martinez, and he wasn't exactly too happy about that. Boy, that was a long game for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking at the box score. John Wetland for the Dodgers eventually comes over to the Expos, gets the win. It's wild looking at these box scores. The Dodgers use only 5 pitchers. It'd be unheard of in today's game. 7 innings for Hershiser, 7 scoreless innings, 2 for Jay Howell, Alejandro Pena, 4 scoreless, Tim Cruz, 3 scoreless, 6 scoreless for Wetland. Just insanity. Pascual Perez starts the game. Do you have any memories of Pascual Perez?
Well, he was called Prancing Pascual Perez because he loved to scoot around the field. He did not walk onto the field. He ran onto the pitcher's mound, and when the inning was over, he was running into the dugout. And then he would pull some tricks like he pretending to throw the ball underneath his legs to second base to pick off the runner. He's pulling funny little tricks like that too. And he would have this pitch. It was a really slow, up in the air pitch. I guess they call it the office pitch, EUPHUS or something. But he was a real showman. He was really a character, and the media loved him. The fans loved him. Management loved him. When he went to the Yankees in 1989 as a free agent, 3 years for $5.7 million, the Expos offered him 3 for maybe 4.5. Dave Dombrowski was in tears when I talked to him when he signed with the Yankees because the Expos looked after him. He had drug problems. They had taken to meetings for, I guess, AA meetings or rehab meetings in Montreal to help him out. They really cared for Pascual Perez. And when he went to the Yankees, he got back into his own drug problems, and he hardly ever played pitch in the majors again. So he was always a favorite of mine and the media and the fans and the management. Unfortunately, he got killed a number of years ago.
Well,
we were talking about reclamation projects. My favorite player is a tie between Rusty and Dennis Martinez. So because in '88 I got to know Dennis Martinez, and since then we talked maybe 2 or 3 times a year. He gave me a good scoop one time in the dugout before a game. In the Expos dugout, he was the only player in the Expos dugout while everybody was out doing BP and stretching. So I decided I'm going over to talk to him. He tells me that he signed a 2-year contract extension. Nobody had it the next day. It's just unbelievable. Gave me a great scoop.
Wow.
Yeah. And he made a great recovery from his alcohol problem with the Expos. And he voted in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. He had 245 wins. He's not quite good enough stats for Cooperstown, but pretty good pitcher for the Expos.
And speaking of Dan Duquette, do you think with the budget limitations, I think even that 94 team, they were next to last in payroll and were able to put that product out there. Do you think that Dan Duquette, he's not trying to get a bunch of ragtag guys, but some, like you said, some guys that have some drug or alcohol problems, and he's just got to weigh it and say, I think we can do something here. This guy's not a total mess, and I don't have a lot of money like the Yankees or the Dodgers do, so we're just going to take a flyer on some guys, and we think we can make it work with some others. And just, I almost feel like you get some of those guys together that are not attractive to some of those other clubs with money, and all of a sudden you've got a lively clubhouse. You've got a group of guys that they've got some life experiences that they can relate, and then the chemistry starts to form. Was that part of it, you think, with Duquette and how he had to assemble the roster?
Yeah, there was a number, Dan and Dave Dombrowski, I guess, and even Murray Cook. Like Tim Burke was a reliever in the Mets system and had alcohol problems. And they decided to trade for him. I'm not too sure who they gave up for him, but he turned out to be a great relief pitcher until 1991, and he started to fade. And he may have been with the Yankees already, but he was traded to the Mets for Ron Darling. And then, Ron Darling didn't last very long with the Expos that year. But you see, Oil Can Boyd was another guy that the Expos brought in to replace Pascual Perez. So they got another showman in return of Pascual. But Oil Can is a showman in himself, colorful, running off the field and punching the air and so on. And he told me a funny story. Every time he'd come in after pitching, he would grin to the hallway beside the dugout and smoke cigarettes. And he wouldn't know what was going on in the field. He could be concentrating on the cigarettes.
Wow.
But he was really, by the quote, he was loved. So I interviewed him for a book a couple of years ago. But it's you're right that the Expos knew that they didn't have a lot of money to spend on these guys, but they wanted to take a flyer on them, as you say. And in most cases, they turned out pretty good, especially Dennis Martinez. That lasted, 7.5 years?
Well, I was going to ask for maybe some thoughts on Felipe Alou. I love what you said. I couldn't agree more. He should have been a manager long before 1992. I want to say inexcusable when you kind of look, if you just kind of Google 1988 managers in Major League Baseball, 89 or maybe even 1990. And it's a lot of accomplished names, some future Hall of Famers, but a lot of guys that look like you and me. And I don't know what Felipe had not proven by the end of the 90s or by the middle of the 80s that didn't warrant giving him a shot. But I love what you say there, that he had the bona fides, and we just, I think as a society, just took us a little too long to put guys like him in the driver's seat.
Yeah, for sure. After the 1982 season, when Jim Fanning managed that year after Blue Monday in 1981, they brought in Bill Burden, but that's when they should have hired Felipe Alou. And when Bill Burden was done after 2 years, they brought in Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers turned out to be a pretty good manager, but on the second attempt, instead of Buck, they probably should have hired Felipe. But I've written about it, that the Expos, they maybe didn't want to give colored people a chance as a manager. The Charles Maupin and John McHale and Jim Fanning all, kind of like part of the white establishment. But it took far too long for Felipe to be brought in as manager. And, in 90, after the Buck was fired, that's when Dave Dombrowski should have hired Felipe there, but then he hired Tom Reynolds. But finally he got his chance. But if Felipe had been brought in the 80s, probably he would have maybe guided those guys to some championships, and maybe he would be a manager elected into Cooperstown. But he didn't have enough wins to get into Cooperstown. But he is certainly a great manager.
Yeah, some of the names from '92, and these are, like I said, future or current Hall of Famers: Sparky Anderson, Bobby Cox, Roger Craig, Jim Fregosi, Phil Garner, Mike Hargrove, Butch Hobson, Art Howell, Tom Kelly, Gene Lamont, Tony La Russa. But it's only Felipe Alou and Cito Gaston, the two Canadian franchise managers that are of color. Unless I'm missing, or Hal McRae, I'm sorry, the Kansas City Royals.
Yeah.
I meant to mention this earlier, but the chapter on, do you say Moise Alou or Moises? I've heard it said both ways.
Moises
Alou and pre-ARB players. You really go into some great detail about the situation that he ran into there in, I believe it was 92, 93.
Yeah, he was upset, and the agent, Bob Lamont, because they were only going to offer him, I think originally about $290 in his third year when he was not eligible for arbitration. He was a pre-arb guy, and the pre-arb guys they just have to accept what the team is going to give it to him. So I wrote the story in the Globe and Mail with Bob Lamont, and Bob Lamont is one of the few times he's ever blown off steam to a reporter about whether football or baseball. So I got a big scoop in the Globe and Mail that day, and then the media followed up on it in Montreal, and then when he got to spring training, he showed up several days late, and he arranged to meet with Bill Stoneman, and Stoney decided to give him, they brought it up to, gave him a 25,000 extra, bring him up to 315. But it's funny, that year, the Blue Jays, and I've written about that before, the pre-arb guys, Sean Green, Paulo Delgado, and Alex Gonzalez, they were going into their same year, and the Blue Jays gave all three of them $500,000. But they only wanted to give Moises and anybody else who came along $315,000. That was their plateau, and that was it. They weren't going to move on. And most teams never would do what the Blue Jays did. $500,000. That was quite a nice chunk of money for players going into their third year. And I wrote that story in the Globe and Mail about those three guys. And then I said I said something in the story. I said they should be happy that they got $500,000. I heard by scuttlebutt that the guy didn't like what I wrote. But the Blue Jays have treated the pre-arb guys pretty good over the years. And now the minimum wage is what? I think it's $7.60. So now they don't necessarily go too high for most of those guys. But anyway, the Expos had a small payroll, so they had to cut costs any way possible.
Now, Danny, you've called Toronto home for the past 25 or so years. Do you get out to Blue Jays games? Do you still like to go to Major League ballparks?
Well, I go maybe 2 or 3 times a year, watch them a lot on TV and follow them. Like I tell people, I've been following the Blue Jays since 1977 when they came into being in the American League. And then a lot of these people know I'm an Expos guy. So some of them like to pick on me and say, "Oh no, you're following the wrong team." But they're Canada's 2 Major League ball teams, so started following the Expos in '69, and then the Blue Jays in '77. So the Blue Jays are still a team I follow.
A couple other tidbits here. I'd love to continue talking for another hour. This has just been fascinating, Danny, and hopefully we can do it again in the future. But I wanted to point out to you, Jeff Facero. I live near Pensacola, Florida, and about 10 years ago, 2014-15, he was the pitching coach for the Double-A Pensacola Blue Wahoos, which at that time I believe we were a Cincinnati Reds affiliate. So I remember seeing Facero on the field there. Were there some guys that maybe took some time to warm up to you, to give you a quote after a game? Some guys that were a little standoffish that you couldn't figure out how to approach them, and then as the season wore on, or maybe a couple of seasons, they, were very eager to speak with you or comfortable talking with you?
I would say, as far as acquiring interviews for all the different books, some of them didn't want to talk. I think I can say the majority would talk. A few of them I needed intermediaries, like an agent or a scout for the team, and they went to that person and said, okay, Danny would like to talk to you. Whereas on my own, they had not shown any interest in talking to me.
Mm-hmm.
But like Ken Phelps, he we played in 1982 and didn't play much. He asked to be traded, and he was traded to Seattle. And I wanted to talk to him because he was mentioned on Seinfeld. He got traded to by somehow, and the Yankees were involved. And anyway, somebody gave me information that he lived in Phoenix or something. So I wrote a postal letter. One of my strategies, Dan, and when I'm trying to contact people, I can't get a hold of them by text, email, or phone call, is write them postal letter by slow mail.
Oh, yeah.
So he answered me. He called up one time. He said, it's Ken Phelps. Oh, shoot. I was really happy. So I talked about him, one of my chapters a couple of years ago. So he talked about his time at the Expos, which wasn't very long, and then he talked about the thrill of getting mentioned on Seinfeld with who was that player and the other player, I forget. But the other player, Bill Stoneman, was general manager in '88. We're going back to '88 or '89. Jay Bruner from the Yankees. Stoneman wanted Jay Bruner from the Yankees for a trade, and he was willing to trade. Oh, I forget. But Buck Rogers talked Stoney out of the trade because Buck told Stoney he wanted Dave Martinez, that little outfielder with the Cubs. And so they traded, and the Yankees moved on and talked to other people and traded him, Jay Bruner, to Seattle. And Stoneman traded Mitch Webster, who had a few good years and then was fading, traded him to the Cubs for Dave Martinez. But Jay Bruner went on and had a number of big years with the Mariners. Dave Martinez, I've mentioned this before. It's one of those affairs that I mention from time to time in my books. He was traded from the Cubs to the Expos because Ryan Sandberg found out Dave Martinez was fooling around with his wife. So he went to Jim Fry. Sandberg went to Jim Fry and said, look, you trade me or trade Martinez. And of course, they're not going to trade Martinez. They're not going to trade Sandberg, the best player maybe. So they traded Martinez.
I think I remember hearing that story.
Yeah. But as far as players, when I was playing, I can generally say that a lot of them were pretty good cooperative.
Would you ever have guys talk to you a little bit off the record? You're just sitting, and all of a sudden now you're just hanging out. And would they ever say things to you without mentioning any names, like describing some personal problems that they're going through, or, hey, I've got a lot on my mind right now? Sometimes as fans, we see a certain player going through a slump, and we don't know that maybe he's going through a divorce or has a problem with one of his kids getting into trouble, or just, lost a mother or father, or things like that. Did any guys ever open up to you and just say, hey, look, just obviously don't print this, but...
Yeah, I'm trying to think of guys who fit into that question. I talked to a guy I know now, Jamey Carroll, for the next book.
Mm-hmm.
He was passed over by the Expos for a few years in the minor leagues. And then in 2002, he got his chance to play with that team when they were first owned by Major League Baseball. So he's a guy who I had to get his agent to get him to talk to me because I made a phone call to him several years ago. I returned the phone call. And so his mother died while he was playing, not for the Expos, but for somebody else. So he told me about that. And her favorite color was purple, and he was traded to the Rockies, which their favorite color is purple.
Oh, wow.
So he told me a number of different stories that he was he was just a part-time player, one of these guys that not a star player. And I loved that kind of a story. So I do that story talking about him growing up. That's how I like to talk about the player when they're growing up as well, not just in the major league, but in the minor leagues, in the tyke or whatever. And Jamey Carroll ended up with more than 10 years of major league service, good for a full pension. Just a part-time player playing for a number of teams, just a hell of a guy. And he appreciated me writing about him. He said, I think it gives me, I'm very humbled that you're writing about me.
Yeah, that's so rewarding.
Yeah.
And I love that you take an interest in those types of players and help to humanize them because they are part of the narrative of the Montreal Expos, especially now. I don't know that, fans are, with social media, some fans can be really, really hard on players. Not that players aren't used to getting heckled, but the death threats and the just awful things that they say and post on social media, they just see these guys as commodities, but they're human beings with wives and families. And I don't even think when we hear that a guy hits the IL for 10 days or 60 days that we really care about the injury or what what repercussions this has for his life for the next 3 months. Because it could be a really depressing period for an athlete where you're in the middle of a playoff chase and now all of a sudden you're sitting on your sofa with your dog running around and just flipping through the channels. I don't think people really think about stuff like that, but you do a great job in going to fascinating detail on some of these players that I don't think you're going to get from any other source or many other sources. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Going into detail, as you say, getting insider quotes and fascinating information that would be appealing to readers. Yeah, that's really what it is. To say humanizing these players, even the star players, like humanizing them too, and talking about their lives. Tim Wallach in 1989, 90, 91, 92, I wrote a fair amount of him that he was disappointed in the contract talks and he was getting less money than Danny Gallagher and Tim Book. They were making more money than him. And it was more the agent that was, telling me all this stuff. And Tim pulled me aside one game in Montreal and said, look at Danny, you're going to talk about this. Talk to me. Don't talk to my agent. So Tim, he's a really quiet, intense, passionate player. Hard to say. I can't say that Tim is somebody that's really admires me, but I've always admired him for the way he played. Solid third baseman and pretty good hitter for all those years. He has been kind of, even after all, he's down on me because of all of this stuff. And he bunch of those guys in the clubhouse hated Dennis Martinez because he's always mouthing off the media. And the guys in the left-hand corner, like Spike Owen and Tom Foley and Dennis Martinez, they'd hate me when I go and talk to Dennis Martinez.
You had a really, really good perspective when you're around these guys all the time. You know who gets along with who, and when there's 9 guys on the field. You know that this guy hates this guy's guts, but they're on the same team and they got to focus on getting the next out. But you were probably acutely aware of when the shortstop and the center fielder are not on speaking terms.
Yeah, you see, when Dennis Martinez pitched his no-hitter perfect game, July the 28th, 1991, one of the first guys to hug him is Tim Wallach. Even though they didn't get along, it had been acknowledged in the media that they didn't ever get along because Wallach didn't like Martinez spouting off. Sometimes he criticized the hitters. If they had no offense, he'd criticize the hitters. And of course, Wallach and those guys didn't like that. But in that moment, Tim Wallach hugged Dennis Martinez.
That baseball will do that. Finally, I know I was saying it probably 20 minutes ago, got to wrap up, but I like the way that this book is written, and I've got some catching up to do on the other titles. But Danny, you really have some fun with these chapters. But one I wanted to call out was, and I laughed out loud, the chapter is called Olympic Stadium Bullshit. It's exactly what it is. That right away just told me, I mean, I'm 2 pages in, I'm looking at the table of contents before I start reading. I think, okay, this is going to be a fun book.
Yeah, so, Olympic Stadium has been a fiasco since it came into being in 1976, especially with the roof a lot of times would never work, so a lot of times you just kept it permanently closed. And now the latest ridicule is that they're spending 870 million Canadian to fix up the roof and the technical ring around the roof. And it's another joke about the Olympic Stadium. So I mentioned earlier that when they were fixing up Olympic Stadium with the roof, and they reconfigured it to not have a baseball field as part of the complex. So that entered into my headline of Olympic Stadium bullshit. It's been a cavernous stadium, wide open. And Rob Manfred has said that if a new team does come to Montreal, they have to have a new stadium in downtown Montreal. But I think there's some leeway that I think they could play in Olympic Stadium for 1 or 2 years while the new stadium is built, if it's ever comes to fruition. That they might still be able to use Olympic Stadium, because when the Blue Jays were playing there, they brought it up to Major League Baseball standards with different types of little renovations.
I wrote this down in around 2000. I guess there was an architect that the Expos hired to put together a rendering of what I guess they were going to call Labatt Park would look like under the Loria ownership. And this just never came to be for various reasons. But there was, I guess, a downtown conceptualized stadium. And it looked like they were trying to go the opposite of what maybe some of the new ballparks at that time were going for, more of a concrete and steel look.
Yeah, Claude Brochu thought he had something going in 97, 98. Then Lawyer thought he had something. The Quebec premier in the days of Brochu told Bud Selig and Claude Brochu at a meeting in Montreal or wherever, Quebec City, that the Quebec government was not prepared to support funds for a new stadium in Montreal when they're closing hospitals in Quebec. So the Quebec premier, not exactly maybe a baseball fan per se, but they just didn't get the job done, or it was Lawyer, Brochu. And people are down on Brochu because of the 94 situation and the not getting the stadium done. But I've always been in Brochu's corner. Every book I write, I'm in Brochu's corner, even though that thing happened in 94 where you get rid of those guys. And we have a good relationship, but I've never liked Jeffrey Loria. But nah. Like I said in my post today when he fired Felipe Alou, who's a shyster, that he leaked it to the New York Times. Jack Curry with the New York Times at the time, and now he's with the US Network. But he wanted to leak the news to the New York Times because he still lives in New York City, Florida. But hopefully sometime in the next few years, somebody's going to come along and maybe have the funds to fund the team. You never know.
Well, Danny, with your, again, like I said earlier, with your help, and I know there's a documentary, No More, the saga of the Montreal Expos, the memorabilia. Maybe, like I said, 2029 is maybe at least a year that will reveal some more, give us some prospects of what's realistic.
The Nose and Mirror documentary is one thing, and the annual Expos Fest Autograph Festival that's held every April since, it's 10 years now. 1,000 people show up. They pay $200 a shot for autographs, a meal, and free beer and wine. That's another example of the interest showing, in a new team. And then there's another documentary coming out sometime in 2025 or 2026 on Netflix, talking about the Expos again. So you never know in the next few years that something might happen. But it's going to take a lot of money, Dan.
Well, Danny, I want to call out some of the titles. This is not comprehensive because there's a few more, and there's a couple books that you've written that are not Expos related. But here's some to check out, folks. I also had this listed, but of course, Explosion, we've been talking about today. Always Remembered, new revelations and old tales about those fabulous Expos. Blue Monday, this is a book that Danny, on another episode, said that some of his fans or readers, they just won't buy this one. It's too depressing for them. But Blue Monday is the Expos, Dodgers, and the home run that changed everything. There is Never Forgotten, tales about Ron LaFleur, Ron Hunt, and other Expos yarns from 69 to 04. There's Bases Loaded. There is Ecstasy to Agony. There's You Don't Forget Homers Like That. So I urge you, and you can find all these titles on Amazon or wherever you buy books. If you've got that special baseball fan in your life, or you are that special baseball fan, and I emphasize baseball fan, whether or not you follow the Expos or you just have some nostalgia about baseball, which who doesn't if you're a fan, this is a great gift idea and a great diversion from whatever's happening in your life, and you just need to get your hands on something that's a page turner and take your mind off of whatever is stressing you in 2025, which could be anything, really, the way that things are happening. But
I see what I'm doing. I'm keeping the Expos legacy alive, and it's another example of the enthusiasm I'm trying to create, for another team. That's what I'm doing. But I'm creating and writing stories for the benefit of Expos fans when there's no team there. I'm keeping the legacy alive. They haven't had a team for 21 years, but I love writing about the Expos.
It's just, if I think, without Danny Gallagher and these titles, and you always, with the consistency here, if you've been reading, you can be sure another one's probably coming pretty soon. I think it's comforting to a lot of baseball fans and Montreal Expos fans that you're out there blowing the horn. And again, thank you. As a baseball fan, I've a long time into the episode now to reveal I'm a Chicago Cub fan. But I remember in those late or 89, early 90s, mid 90s, we were National League East division rivals. I watched a lot of games between the Cubs and Expos, and I really appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been baseball has been a passion of mine. I grew up playing baseball, competitive adult baseball, for 27 consecutive years in different parts of Canada, where I was reporter, and then to get on the beat in 1988, it just electrified my passion for baseball and the Expos. And thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a real blast, and talking to you and reliving all these memories.
Oh, I love it. I love it, Danny. Trying to think of a question I haven't asked to wrap us up here, but How about something that maybe you haven't been asked? Every ballpark has, hot dogs and other things on the menu. Was there anything there at Olympic Stadium that you liked? Are you a hot dog guy? Or what was something that was, if you're going to the concession stand at Olympic Stadium and somebody like me, you never went there, never saw a ball game there, what would you say, hey, you need to try this?
Well, they had hot dogs, but they also had poutine, which is famous in Quebec and Montreal. And then, even before the games, they had the Oompah band stirring up excitement. That was one of the Expos games, and Fernand Lapierre on the organist playing different songs. Take me out to the ball game, and so there was the food, and then there's the ambience that created a nice atmosphere at the Expos games at Jerry Park or Olympic Stadium. It's and then there's those guys walking around blowing their flutes. They're pretty noisy, but
and let me not forget to make mention of Yuppie.
Exactly. They're another famous character since 1979, and he got thrown out of the game in the 2020 game by Tommy Lasorda.
I was about to say, wasn't it Yuppie that really got under Lasorda's skin one particular game, or maybe multiple times? I don't know.
And there's the video, the third base umpire, he goes like this, pointing to Yuppie, you're out of here. And everybody, and since then, for all these years after, before he died, everybody's all criticizing Tommy Lasorda for doing that.
Yeah. Okay. People are on social media. Where can they find you? What's the handle for Danny Gallagher again?
Yeah. On Twitter, it's Dano Gallagher, Tanno Gallagher, Gallagher 7. Dano Gallagher 7. And then on Facebook, I'm just simply Danny Gallagher. I'm not on Instagram or anything else. No.
Real lightning round of names here, just to throw them out here. Fellow Dan Expos. Dan Schatzeder, 1977 to 80. Dan Warthen, 1975 and 76. Dan Smith, 99 to 01. And I've got a Dan McGinn, the inaugural season, 69 through the 72 season.
Yeah, that's pretty good. A guy like Dan Schatzeder is really good to talk. If you ever want to talk to him, let me know.
I'm glad you asked, because I figured I might ask you for recommendations, because I've tried.
Exactly. Anytime, Dan.
Some of these
Dan
guys.
Warden, I've never been able to get hold of Dan Wood.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ball players that I've been able to get, it's really difficult for me and at my perch to go through a Major League Baseball team to talk to an active player. But if it's a retired player, I've found one of my guests on LinkedIn, found another one, just dug up an email address online. I have tried the snail mail. I got one. It was the Kentucky Derby winner. Not a baseball guy, but the jockey for a Kentucky Derby winner through snail mail. So reading your book, and I can appreciate how resourceful you must be to get in touch with these guys.
Or anytime, Dan, I can help you with Schatz. His nickname is Schatz.
Okay, well...
He's always been nice for books, Dan Schatzeder. I text him or talk to him. He's just super.
I'd love to have him on the show. I appreciate that, Danny.
Okay.
Well, folks, check him out. If you go on YouTube, and if you listen to other podcasts, if you're on Spotify or Apple, you can probably find some of these, but Danny has appeared on The Bookshelf Conversations. He's been on Judgment Calls, Great Canadian Sports Show. He's been on Expos Hidden Stories, Stay Home with Saber, Society for American Baseball Research, and Good Seats Still Available, and probably some more. But what a treat today. Was really looking forward to this, Danny, and you did not disappoint. So I've had such a great time talking with you today.
Yeah, look, thanks again, Dan. Anytime. It's just been so much fun today.
Wonderful. Well, folks, that's it for this episode of Dan Time. Thanks for listening. Tell a friend about it. And follow Danny Gallagher. Hey, get started with any of these books, but I really like the Explosion here. One thing we didn't talk about on the back of the book, and we'll just save this for you, the listener, to learn more about, but there is, you may not know, a Tom Brady connection to the Expos, but it's just packed with just excellent stories for you or your baseball fan friends. Have a great rest of the week, and let's see those Spos back in. There's always hope. Hope springs eternal, so let's see those Spos in action again. May take another 10 or 20 years, but...
Okay, Dan.
Thank you, Danny. Take care. Thanks for being on the show today.
Okay, bye now.